30 years later, a single boarding pass sits sealed inside a safety deposit box in Los Angeles. Its ink slightly faded, but its meaning undiminished. It's from Flight 702, departing at exactly 2:03 a.m., Los Angeles to New York, on a quiet spring morning most people have long forgotten. The paper itself looks ordinary. No gold embossing, no dramatic signature across the front, just a seat number and a name that, at the time, meant everything to millions. But what makes it historic isn't who was on the flight, it's what didn't happen. At 2:17 a.m., somewhere between pushback and takeoff, someone made a choice so small it barely registered. No applause followed. No headlines were written the next day. In fact, almost everyone on board slept through it. And yet that unnoticed decision would ripple outward in ways no one could have predicted, shaping careers, reputations, and a story still told in hushed tones decades later. Have you ever made a choice that felt insignificant in the moment? One that seemed too small to matter? That night proves something most people learn too late. History doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it slips in quietly at 2 a.m., waiting to see who's paying attention. Her name was Elena Martinez, and if you had passed her in the terminal that night, you wouldn't have remembered her. She was 32, 5 years into working overnight shifts as a gate agent, the kind of job people only notice when something goes wrong. At 2 a.m., the airport feels less like a place of adventure and more like a fluorescent-lit waiting room for the exhausted. The polished floors reflect tired faces. The coffee tastes burned. Announcements echo through half-empty corridors, as if even the walls are yawning. This was Elena's world. She had requested the night schedule because it paid slightly more and because it allowed her to attend community college classes during the day. After her father's construction injury left him unable to work, she became the steady one in the family. Bills didn't care about dreams. Responsibility rarely waits for perfect timing. So she learned to function on 4 hours of sleep, to smile when passengers snapped at her, to solve problems with a calm voice, even when her own life felt like a juggling act. Have you ever carried that quiet weight, the kind no one applauds but everyone depends on? By the time Flight 702 appeared on her screen, she had already handled 2 delays, 1 missed connection, and a frustrated businessman who blamed her for weather she didn't control. Her feet ached, her ponytail had loosened. The rhythm of scanning boarding passes had become mechanical, almost meditative. Beep, nod. Have a good flight. Beep, nod. Safe travels. In jobs like hers, monotony can either numb you or sharpen you. Elena had chosen to let it sharpen her. She watched people carefully, not out of curiosity, but necessity. You learn a lot at a boarding gate at 2 a.m. You learn who is anxious, who is lonely, who is pretending to be stronger than they feel. There was nothing glamorous about her role, no cameras, no applause, just a name tag and a responsibility to keep things moving. And yet, beneath that routine lived something powerful, the discipline to treat every traveler with the same steady respect, whether they wore a wrinkled hoodie or an expensive suit. That consistency was invisible, but it was real. It was built from fatigue, from sacrifice, from the decision to show up even when no one is watching. What she couldn't see, standing under those humming lights, was that the very habits forged in ordinary nights were preparing her for an extraordinary one. The world often imagines history being shaped by famous hands, but more often than not, it begins with someone like Elena, tired but attentive, unnoticed but awake, doing her job with integrity long before anyone realizes it matters. Boarding was nearly complete when 2 final passengers approached the counter, caps pulled low, shoulders slightly curved inward as if trying to occupy less space than their height required. Elena glanced up with the same automatic smile she had offered 100 times already that night. "Good morning," she said softly, hand extended for the boarding passes. One of the men slid them forward without lifting his head.
His voice, when he thanked her, was low and measured, familiar. Not loud familiar, not instantly placeable, but the kind that brushes against memory. She scanned the first pass, the name registered before her mind allowed it to settle. She looked up just briefly, then back down, then up again. She looked twice, not because she wanted confirmation of fame, but because her brain was negotiating with disbelief. The man removed his sunglasses for a moment to rub his eyes, and there it was, the face she had seen framed on magazine covers and cinema screens for years. Older now, more tired, human in a way posters never capture. The second man shifted beside him, equally quiet, equally intent on blending in. No entourage, no assistant hovering, just two men at 2 a.m., boarding like everyone else. And that contrast hit her. Public legends who filled theaters, standing inches away, looking like travelers who had missed too much sleep and wanted nothing more than a seat and silence. It's strange, isn't it, how someone the world sees as larger than life can appear almost fragile when the spotlight disappears. In that suspended moment, Elena felt the subtle pull of recognition. She could acknowledge them. She could whisper admiration. She could let her expression change in a way that signaled she knew. A story like this doesn't come often. When would she ever stand this close again? But another awareness surfaced just as quickly. Their posture wasn't guarded arrogance, it was practiced protection. The caps, the late flight, the lack of eye contact, it all carried the same message: please, not tonight. Have you ever sensed that someone needed space more than praise? It's a delicate instinct, one you only notice if you slow down. Elena felt her heart rate rise, not from excitement, but from responsibility. Recognition is powerful. It can honor someone, but it can also expose them. And exposure at the wrong moment can feel like theft.
As the final passengers filtered through and the terminal settled into that fragile pre-departure quiet, Elena felt the weight of a choice pressing against her ribs. Recognition had already happened inside her. That part was done. The real decision was what to do next. She could alert the crew with a raised eyebrow and a whisper. She could subtly signal that someone important was on board. Information spreads quickly in closed spaces, and once it spreads, it rarely returns to silence. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Boarding completed. The gate area thinned out. She began tidying the counter, but her attention stayed alert, tuned to the atmosphere the way it had been trained to be. Then she saw it. A young passenger lingering near the seating area, scrolling on his phone, glancing toward the jet bridge with growing curiosity. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, the kind that travels from uncertainty to certainty in seconds. He stood up slowly. This is how peace unravels, Elena thought, not with chaos, but with one excited voice that carries farther than intended. She felt a quick surge of adrenaline. She could pretend not to notice. After all, it wasn't technically her responsibility once passengers boarded. Or she could intervene, quietly, respectfully, before excitement became disruption. The difference between those two paths was subtle, almost invisible, yet in that moment it meant everything. She stepped forward before the young man reached the doorway. Her tone remained warm, steady. She asked if he needed assistance with a connection, redirecting his focus without accusation. He hesitated, eyes bright with the thrill of proximity to fame. "I think I just saw," he began. Elena nodded gently, not confirming, not denying. "It's a late flight," she said. "Everyone's just trying to get home." There was no lecture, no authority flexed for ego, just calm presence. She held his gaze long enough for the message to land. Excitement is natural, but dignity matters more. Have you ever been given the chance to choose between a moment of attention and a moment of integrity? They don't feel equal in the moment. Attention sparkles, integrity whispers. The young man exhaled. The urgency softened. He gave a small nod, as if deciding something within himself, and returned to his seat without another word.
The fragile atmosphere held. Elena felt the tension leave her shoulders. It wasn't dramatic, no applause, no acknowledgement, yet she knew she had just protected something rare. Not celebrity status, but simple humanity. Those men on board would never know how close the night had come to shifting. They would only feel the absence of interruption, the gift of anonymity. And that is the turning point most people miss. History isn't always shaped by grand gestures. Sometimes it is guarded by someone willing to absorb a little pressure so someone else can breathe. In choosing discretion over recognition, Elena did something powerful. She affirmed that even the most famous among us deserve ordinary moments. She chose to value a person over a story. In that quiet act at 2 a.m., the trajectory of the night and far beyond it was set. The cabin was quiet now, the low hum of engines filling the space between the occasional rustle of a blanket and the soft sigh of a passenger settling in. Elena returned to her post near the galley, but she kept a discreet watch on row 3. There, in the dim glow of the reading light, one of the men lifted his head slightly, eyes meeting hers with a weightless acknowledgement that didn't need words. In that gaze, she recognized the gratitude that travels quietly, without announcement, the kind that is heavier and more sincere because it is unspoken. Have you ever experienced that moment when someone thanks you in a way that can't be captured on paper, yet it lands deeper than any public recognition ever could? A few minutes later, the same man reached into his pocket and withdrew a small folded piece of paper. He handed it to her without preamble. It was a handwritten note, simple and precise, his penmanship deliberate, each word chosen carefully, slanted slightly to the right, as if carrying weight beyond the paper itself. She felt the texture under her fingers, ordinary yet extraordinary. Can an object be both fragile and monumental at the same time? This one was. It wasn't signed with fame or the weight of celebrity, but with sincerity and human acknowledgement. She unfolded it, knowing instinctively to read it later, to savor it privately, to let it remind her why quiet choices can echo so far beyond the moment. The other man leaned slightly toward her, voice low, calm, almost shy. "You gave us something rare tonight. No flourish, no exaggeration, just truth, the kind that settles like sunlight into a room you thought you knew. It was validation without spectacle, the kind that affirms not what she had done for their names, but what she had done for their humanity. That distinction mattered more than applause ever could. Do you see how small gestures, when rooted in attentiveness and respect, can ripple farther than grand displays ever will?" Elena nodded, words failing her for the first time that night. She understood immediately. The moment she had protected, the space she had preserved, was already shaping their experience of the flight. They could finally exhale, let their guard down, just be two men quietly moving through the hours before sunrise, unobserved and unremarkable. And in doing so, they had given her something in return, proof that integrity and discretion carry power, the kind that leaves a lasting imprint, invisible but undeniable. The exchange ended almost as quickly as it had begun. The note rested in her hand, folded neatly, waiting for a later moment to reveal its message. The men adjusted their seats, settled into the cushions with the ease of travelers no longer performing for an audience. Elena allowed herself a soft exhale, the tension of responsibility dissolving into quiet satisfaction. Moments like these are rare. They don't announce themselves, and often the world never witnesses them, but they are profound, aren't they? Because they show that human decency, when chosen deliberately and quietly, can create something unforgettable.
Even as she returned fully to her duties, the cabin felt subtly different. There was a warmth now that had not been present before, a calm reassurance that careful observation and thoughtful action matter more than we often realize. And yet, she knew instinctively this was not the end.
Something had been set in motion, a quiet thread connecting them beyond the flight itself, a seed planted in the soil of discretion that would grow in ways she could not yet imagine. This was the payoff, not the recognition, not the story, but the living proof that what we do for others, unseen and unheralded, matters profoundly. Years later, Elena would look back on that quiet 2 a.m. flight and realize the magnitude of a single deliberate choice she had made in the midst of routine. At the time, it had felt like nothing more than doing her job with care, protecting the privacy of 2 exhausted passengers, making sure their space remained unbroken. But life has a way of magnifying the consequences of small decisions in ways we rarely predict. Can one act of attentiveness truly ripple outwards to touch countless lives, reshape narratives, or influence systems? In Elena's case, it did. Within months, she was promoted to a training supervisor position, not for exceptional flight performance alone, but because her colleagues and managers recognized a deeper skill, the ability to see people, to understand their needs before they spoke, and to protect their dignity even under subtle pressure. The story of that red-eye flight quietly circulated among the crew, passed from one new hire to the next, growing in legend, not as gossip about celebrities, but as a lesson in human decency and professional excellence. How often do we underestimate the long-term impact of a small act when it is rooted in empathy rather than expectation? Then came the letter. Months after the flight, the handwritten note arrived from one of the men she had served that night, filled with reflections on how her discretion had restored their trust in public spaces. It wasn't simply gratitude, it was a testament to the power of invisible choices. That letter inspired her to advocate for policy changes within the airline, emphasizing passenger privacy, mental well-being, and the importance of creating calm zones in first class. Could a single choice made in a fleeting moment actually shape an institutional culture? In her experience, yes. Small actions, when done with clarity and courage, have a way of expanding beyond their original context, affecting people and policies in ways the actor cannot immediately see. The story eventually leaked into broader circles. Articles, interviews, and talks referenced the flight, not to idolize the passengers, but to honor the principle that human kindness and professional integrity could coexist in high-pressure environments. Her actions became a blueprint for how service could transcend routine tasks and touch lives. People began to cite the example in hospitality courses, in leadership workshops, even in philanthropy circles, illustrating the cascading effect of attentiveness and discretion. The lesson was clear. The quietest acts often resonate longest, echoing far beyond the moment they occur. Elena never sought recognition, yet her influence spread nonetheless. The passengers themselves, famed yet fatigued, continued to share the story in private conversations and public reflections, emphasizing that the peace and dignity they had experienced that night mattered more than fame or public accolades. Her single, small decision became part of a cultural memory, a reminder that protecting someone's right to simply exist without performance or expectation is a gift whose value grows over time. And isn't that the essence of legacy? Not fame or spectacle, but the subtle, persistent ways our choices touch others and endure. Even decades later, the ripple effect persisted. Mentors quoted her example, new crews shared the story as a moral compass, and charitable acts inspired by the principles she embodied multiplied quietly. It was a chain reaction initiated by a decision no one had noticed at the time, yet whose impact would be felt across professional, social, and personal spheres for years to come. The lesson is unmistakable. When we act with deliberate care and respect, when we choose humanity over recognition, our influence can quietly transform history in ways we might never have imagined. And that is the profound power of a single considered choice. Have you ever paused to consider the quiet moments that define who we are? The choices no one notices, yet leave a mark far beyond the immediate. That 2 a.m. flight, so unremarkable at first glance, was more than just a routine red-eye. It became a mirror reflecting something timeless about human dignity and empathy. It reminds us that fame or recognition doesn't erase the fundamental need to be seen as a person rather than a persona. We often imagine that the extraordinary is measured in applause, headlines, or accolades, yet some of the most profound moments of influence come from simply noticing what someone else needs without being asked. Can we recognize how much power lies in the invisible? How often do we overlook the subtle opportunities to protect someone's peace, to offer dignity instead of attention, to choose humanity over spectacle? Think about it. Two of the most celebrated figures of their time, symbols of glamour and public adoration, were yearning for something as simple as invisibility. And one ordinary person, a flight attendant following her instincts, understood that the right choice was not to elevate them, not to highlight their fame, but to preserve their privacy. That choice, small in the moment yet monumental in its effect, reverberated across decades, shaping culture, influencing policy, and inspiring countless others. It teaches that the impact of our actions is rarely measured in the immediate, that a single decision guided by empathy and respect can ripple out in ways no one can predict. What would it mean in your life if you approached the ordinary with that same level of care and thoughtfulness? This isn't just a story about celebrities or a remarkable flight. It is a story about the quiet, often unseen power each of us wields every day. It asks us to consider how we interact with those around us, how we protect the dignity of strangers, colleagues, friends, or even fleeting acquaintances. How would our world shift if more people chose the subtle act of kindness that honors another's humanity rather than chasing recognition or approval? The flight reminds us that heroism can exist in silence, that respect and discretion can be far more transformative than spectacle or fanfare. We are constantly presented with small, pivotal choices. The question is whether we notice them, whether we rise to the moment without expectation of reward. As you reflect on this, consider the moments in your life when a quiet decision could create a ripple far beyond your awareness. When have you been tempted to act for recognition rather than integrity, or conversely, to step back and allow someone else to simply exist without performance? The power of invisible kindness is subtle, yet its reach is profound. It is in those moments, often overlooked, that we find the truest measure of character. What could happen if we treated more moments with the same deliberate care that preserved the peace of that flight? Could we reshape not only individual lives, but the culture around us, silently and persistently?